Hi everyone, I'm Sujena. Today I'll be presenting on the caste system and how it affects Indian classical dance. So for my presentation, I'll start by speaking about what the final project looked like. Then I'll provide some definitions and some historical background. Then I'll be talking about the caste system in Bharatanatyam today, and then I'll be speaking about how I reported and researched for the project. I'll show some photos, and then I'll finish by talking about why we still talk about caste. So my final project was a long-form journalistic article, as well as some photos that I took in Chennai. Chennai is a city in India that is like the cultural epicenter of Bharatanatyam, and Bharatanatyam is a form of Indian classical dance, which is what I focused on for this project. And it's housed on a website. And this is what the article looks like. So the caste system is a form of social division that's very much tied to concepts of purity. And there's generally four groups, with Brahmins or priests being at the top. And it originated from Hinduism, but it's also practiced by other religions. And importantly, it was abolished in 1950 in the Indian Constitution, but it continues to affect parts of Indian society today. And Bharatanatyam, as I said earlier, is an Indian classical dance form that has ancient and medieval roots, and it's also a dance form that I have learned since I was 5. So to talk a little bit about the history, before I start, I want to say that this is a very complex and controversial kind of history of Bharatanatyam. It's something that's very much disputed by dance scholars and dancers today. So I have presented a very abbreviated version for the sake of this presentation, but I encourage you to if you're interested, to read more about it, because there's a lot more to say about it. So South India has always had a rich tradition of temple and courtesan dancers, but from the beginning they were very much viewed in an ambiguous way. They had both privilege and money and wealth in some cases, but they were also kind of looked down upon. And in the medieval period is when one of the most important scholars on this topic, Davesh Sonji, argues that these dancing women kind of emerged as like a distinct group or a distinct class, and they had family structures headed by women. The dance form was passed down matrilineally, and they also sometimes took part in a socially accepted system of being concubines, where they had a patron, and there was also religious significance to the system. And in the 19th century is when things started to change. So as you probably know, India was a British colony. And there's a lot of factors that go into this, but I think to make it brief, I'll just say that a combination of Victorian ideals, as well as changing morals and the economic disenfranchisement of Indian temples and royal systems, made it so that these hereditary dancers were very much stigmatized and looked down upon and kind of labeled as prostitutes. And it culminated in an act in a law in 1947 that made their dancing and their way of life illegal. At the same time, though, India gained independence in 1947, and there was a lot of nationalistic angst about having a national symbol to represent the new country. And so some reformers turned to the dance form of these hereditary dancers, and they wanted to make it the national symbol of the country. But in order to do that, the dance form, they felt that it needed to be taken away from the original practitioners because they had become looked down upon and stigmatized. And so there was a lot of ways in which this happened, but they kind of transformed it into something that was more, quote unquote, respectable, something that wasn't sort of seen as a moral blight on the nation anymore, and rather a respectable symbol of India. And part of that transformation was that upper caste women actually became the majority of people that dance the art form rather than the original practitioners, which is still the case today. So to kind of look at this issue, one part of my written project actually speaks to descendants of hereditary dancers today, and I face a lot of stigma toward the barriers to dancing because of the stigma that was placed on them. And they also, in some cases, face economic insecurity and abuse because of this reputation that was put on them during the 19th and 20th centuries. And at the same time, they kind of watch as upper caste dancers dance their art form that was part of their way of life and gain praise for it, while they have had to take up different caste names to kind of hide the fact that they belong to this group of hereditary dancing women. And this is a quote from one of the descendants of hereditary dancers that I interviewed for my article. She says, she actually entered the dance world, but she faced a lot of remarks and stigma as a result of her ancestry. And she said, mentally, you are made to think you have made some mistake unknowingly, that you are at a disadvantage. So today, even Bharatanatyam dancers that are not descendants of hereditary artists say they face caste discrimination. That can look like, if they're not Brahmin or one of the other higher castes, so that can look like colorism from a young age, questions trying to place caste status, and seeing light-skinned upper caste dancers getting more performance opportunities. This is something that they spoke to me about in the interviews that I conducted. And also the problem of casteism extends to the US because multiple dancers say, the similar kinds of discrimination that they experienced in India continued when they immigrated here. And this is a quote from a dance teacher in Georgia who I spoke to, who kind of noted how as a non-Brahmin woman, much of the discrimination she faced in India very much continued in the US. And she said, I thought that kind of thing happened in India. Why would they bring that kind of a culture here, as in the US? And to research and report for my project, I interviewed dance scholars, dance teachers, and dancers, both in India and the US, and in Tamil and English. And my research was based on medieval Tamil texts and records from early 20th century India. And there's also a lot of modern controversies actually surrounding caste in the Indian classical arts world, so I also looked into that. So now I'll be showing you briefly some of the pictures that I took for this project. So one series of photos that I took was at the sabhas in Chennai, and sabhas are performance halls in the city that have been critiqued in recent years for being upper caste spaces. So basically, majority of the performers are upper caste, and so is the audience. This is a picture that I took of a lady that worked as a cleaner there, and another lady that's coming down from one of the dance performances. This is a picture that I took outside of one of the sabhas. And another series that I created was on just dance culture in Chennai. As I said, it's a very important city for Bharatanatyam. This is a teacher that I interviewed and got to take photos of, and he also spoke to the very exclusive culture at Chennai sabhas. This is a picture of a woman performing at one of the performance halls. And the final series that I'd like to show a little bit of is of daily life in Chennai. This is during a temple procession. I think he was carrying the umbrella and then it fell down, so they helped him to put it back up. And this is a picture that I took at a trade station in Chennai. So to conclude, I'd like to touch on why we still talk about caste in Bharatanatyam, because there is a strong sentiment in Indian society, especially in South Indian society, where the politics are more progressive, that caste is no longer an issue that needs to be spoken about. So through Bharatanatyam, firstly, we see how caste intersects with beauty standards and Indian aesthetics. We can ask a lot of questions of the dance form, like what is considered, or who is considered a beautiful dancer, or what is considered good dancing? And the answers that the dominant culture will tell you are very much informed by caste. Because that has become the majority of who practices the art form today. And that was a very deliberate transition. Also, caste in Bharatanatyam and Indian classical arts has received a lot of media attention. T.M. Krishna is a famous Indian classical singer who has spoken up about caste dynamics in the classical art world of classical arts, and he has received both praise and infamy, I guess you could say, for that. And finally, and also casteism in Bharatanatyam shows up in subtle ways, and I think that really reflects the modern evolution of the issue and how of course, there's still violent atrocities committed against people of lower caste backgrounds in India and North India specifically, but a lot of the times, because it's technically made illegal, it shows up in subtle ways through how people act, what spaces they occupy, how they speak, or who's allowed to shine in certain spaces. Finally, because Bharatanatyam is very popular in the diaspora, it's kind of a way to see the fact that the caste system is also up for export, just like our arts and our culture. This was something that was noted by the popular Indian essayist Arundhati Roy, kind of speaking about how caste discrimination shows up in the US, in South Africa, in places where the South Asian diaspora has gone far beyond India. So that was my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. And I'm open to any questions.
Very interesting presentation. I just want to ask, like, have you researched the efforts that have been taken to kind of eliminate the casteism in Bharatanatyam? And if not, like, are there efforts that have been made?
Yes, so as I said earlier, there's a lot of discussion actually about this topic going on. There are a lot of talks and panels that have been held about the issue of caste dynamics and the kind of troubled history of the art form, especially with the hereditary dancers. There's also been instances of like lower caste and Dalit dancers being able to, enter these traditionally very like exclusive performing spaces. There's also people like T.M. Krishna, who is Brahmin, the highest class, but caste, sorry, who has written books, and he tries very actively to work against the elitism of the Indian classical arts world. But one thing that I noticed in working on this project is that there's a lot of different, like, I don't want to say factions, but different ways of thought around this issue and how to solve the issue. Some people want to take a more radical approach. Some people believe that, okay, maybe there was a troubled issue, but it's not an issue anymore. It's egalitarian. So I wouldn't say there's like a unified like movement, but there's definitely people that are talking about this and trying to do something about it.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering whether you still dance, and if any of your personal experiences informed or like inspired this project.
Yeah, I definitely still dance. I mean, I'm kind of out of practice because I've been in school, but yeah, I definitely still dance. I love to dance. And actually, I was interested in this topic because of the experiences of my own dance teacher that I learned with, who kind of spoke about the experiences of the inequalities she faced as a dance teacher who's not upper caste or of the highest caste. And one thing that stood out to me is that many of the things that she would talk about actually happened in the US. And my project actually concentrates very heavily on caste dynamics in the diaspora, because that's very interesting to me, that these things are kind of perpetuated outside of our home country.
Awesome, great job, Sujena.
Thank you.